Welcome to the Mind Solution podcast with Sarah Maud. The Mind Solution podcast is for leaders like you who are passionate about well-being in the workplace because you understand that a strong, resilient and happy workforce is the key to your organisation's success. The Mind Solution podcast is here to help you. So join us every week where we'll share with you powerful insights, strategies and know-how to ensure that your people and your organisation are truly thriving from the inside out. Okay, hello and welcome everybody. And today we're very, very lucky to be joined by Fran Dean-Bishop, CEO of Aerobodies, all the way from Washington, D.C. Welcome here, Fran.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, Sarah, and your listeners.
Oh, wonderful. Now, Fran and I work both very much in the same space of well-being in the workplace, and I can't wait to uncover what's been going on in Fran's world and the organizations that you work with, Fran. So I think it's reasonable to say that the last 2 years have been interesting ones when it's come to well-being in the workplace. So I'd love to kick off today's talk by actually just understanding, what are you seeing when it's coming to the whole concept of workplace well-being?
That's a great question, and I think a very profound one, because what was acceptable and required, I think, pre-COVID has been escalated and magnified and even, I think, tripled because of COVID and what the expectation is. So we're definitely seeing, so I'm in the heart of the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. You'll probably hear traffic or police or whatever outside. So I am in it. And with that, I think that government, whether we want to accept it or not, does set the tone for how the rest of the world works. Because no matter if you're a large company or a small company, to some extent, you are relying on the government. If it's not from compliance, it could be a client. So all that to be said, I think the government is leading the way in terms of what we're starting to see. And I am definitely starting to see, at least here in Washington, a shift to bring employees back into the office. I've actually talked to a couple of clients in the last couple of weeks that have said that they're making it, they're changing their work hybrid formula, but there is a requirement for employees to be on site for a certain amount of hours. So, I think that this is one of those things where it's going to maybe slowly trickle across private industry and commercial in terms of how fast we see people having to go back, but I definitely see it's coming. And so with that, I'm seeing definitely an increase of awareness of changes we need to make to the footprint in the office. Before, it was just making sure the employees were comfortable remotely and whether wherever their home office was set up. But now it's definitely a change up in terms of how are we going to make sure that people feel safe, they feel comfortable, they feel invited back in, and this is a workplace where they want to be. So those are some of the things that we're definitely seeing here in the Washington area and actually throughout North America.
Yes. And I find it really interesting what you said in that latter part about where employees want to be, because I know from my own work with organizations, there's been a real shift in that psychological contract around what employees used to traditionally want in the psychological contract, which I felt was a lot more traditional terms, conditions, pay, working environment, to really now thinking about actually what matters to me, how am I being taken care of, how are my needs being met in a way that the psychological contract never really touched on that much. Is that what you're seeing as well, Fran?
I love the way you put that, Sarah, the psychological contract. Absolutely. Absolutely. I definitely feel like employees are in a place now, a bit more of ownership and leading the conversation. I feel as if they are making a very clear choice with regards to what they want, what they're looking for, and what they're willing and not willing to accept. And that's informing a lot of the decisions in terms of who works where. You see employees going to the Midwest here in the States. People have worked on either the West Coast or the East Coast. Those are really, the high flyers. So you have New York, DC, you have San Francisco, LA, San Diego, and now people are moving more inward and going Midwest. It's less cost of living and it's a better quality of life because there's less going and coming and all that kind of thing, less people, whatever. So people are moving out into the mountainous regions or by the ocean. But with that, they're also making the decision that I can make an exchange. I think we were talking about a little bit earlier, right? So I can take less money because I don't need to, have this $3,000 or $4,000 vacation. Now, my vacation could be around my home because now I have a little bit more yard because I'm not living in a high-rise building in the middle of Manhattan. So because of that, it's an exchange now. It's an exchange and people are deciding what well-being means to me and what I'm willing to accept. And because of that, I think that's definitely leading the conversation. Now, do I think that we're going to, once we learn to live with COVID, is it going to be what we've seen in the past, a 90% a hybrid workforce or 90% remote workforce? I don't think so, because I think there are definitely organizations where they have to have people on site. Manufacturing is one, right? You think about the stock market in New York City. So you can only do those jobs for remote for so long. Healthcare, nurses can't call in from home. So as much as people want to make that claim that, I'm not going back to work. Well, unless you've got a huge, run ramp and a huge cash savings, that argument is only going to hold up for so long. So I do think there's going to be some give and take. I do think there's going to be some negotiations, and we're already seeing it across employers in North America. We're definitely seeing that happen.
Fascinating. And really, I love what you said about that trade-off, that actually, if you move out to those mountainous regions by the ocean, that actually, like you say, you don't need that $4,000 vacation. Now, some things which I found really interesting over the last few years, which comes a lot down to the organization's culture. So a couple of examples that come off the top of my head are when Nike closed its offices for a week to give staff a mental health break. And then another organization called Bumble, which are the dating app, they again shut their offices last year for a week because I guess they weren't feeling the love in the offices. And they were saying that staff were burnt out, and it was like, okay, we're just going to give people a week off. And I know myself, as somebody that works in this field, I'm like, no, this is like, we've got to look at prevention over cure. And yeah, curious to find out your thoughts around organizational culture as we move forward.
Great question, Sarah. One of the things we're trying to do is really just work with clients on a case-by-case basis. I think there are organizations like the big tech companies that have a huge slush fund that can close offices. I think it was either Citibank or Chase did that last year, where they decided no Zoom meetings on Fridays or work from home or half-day Fridays. I think that there are definitely organizations that may be able to afford to do that. And then I think there's other organizations that may not have that kind of financial latitude, but certainly can decide to give people maybe a couple extra hours per week, or maybe people have a well-being hour or a nutritionist on call via Zoom, or a health therapist on call, or opening up the meetings a little bit differently so that people feel a little bit more support around resiliency and well-being. So, what we're trying to do and what we've definitely encouraged clients to do is really case by case, what really works for your organization. And I think the other thing that's important is to take a pulse. Your employees may not want that. What do they want? What do they need? It's very interesting. It's kind of shocking to me how few companies are really doing this. There was always in our industry they're called to do assessments, and people would do them on a yearly basis and maybe, semi-annually. But you should be, at this point, everyone should know that you need to be checking in with your people weekly, depending on the size of your team, some cases daily. I know in our company, we're a size of about 20 employees. I check in with my folks. There's no reason why as a CEO, I can't check in daily via email, face-to-face, something. So I think you have to decide what works for your organization and make sure you do it and have a framework in place to work through that. But again, as we both know, the game has changed. So, what you were doing before in the template that worked for the work office or the home work life before is clearly changed. And I think it's time for people to accept that and be willing to reiterate, change, innovate, whatever you want to call it, and accept where we are today.
Absolutely. And I loved what you said about you as the chief exec checking in with your team, checking in with your staff daily. Now, we know that a lot of C-suite leaders, there might be great leaders in terms of their functional expertise, but in terms of that, what was maybe seen in the past as pink and fluffy, we're now seeing this call for almost like a new breed of leadership. Leaders that listen, leaders that can empathize, leaders that can also be prepared to show their own vulnerability, the fact that they are a human being. Yeah. And we've still got some leaders out there that still see mental health as, it's a nice to have. They're not making the link between high performance and well-being. Is that what you're seeing in America as well?
That's a kind of a loaded question. I would say that those who are not embracing the change, they're just going to be left behind. I think that you can read it, if you could pick up any financial document today, whether it's Financial Times or Wall Street Journal or New York Times, and there's plenty of research now for making the case for and ensuring that you have the right mix of employee benefits and well-being in the portfolio to offer employees, however you do it, whatever that mix looks like. And there's plenty of documentation, and I can send it to you if you reach out to me, Fran at Aerobodies, that shows that those companies are more profitable across the board. It's not like when I started my company in 1997, where there was a small composite of an industry in the DC area, and that was the legal industry, where lawyers were willing to invest in not only the C-suite but other employees because they were in the seats all the time, and so they recognized that we've got to do something to help people counterbalance their wellness and fitness. But if in fact that's how you're thinking today, you're not going to last. We can see how the world shows up when bad leaders are in place and bad leaders do bad things. The consensus is they're out, and we've seen this across the board, multiple industries, government, commercial, it's on and on. So I don't think that will last very long, and it's unfortunate that they feel that way, but you're counting your days are numbered.
Yeah, no, I love that. I absolutely love that, because you're right. There is so much research, data, studies between that link, that return on investment, and actually what does a good leader look like these days. And it's kind of, well, I was going to say there is a lot. That doesn't mean that leaders aren't out there that aren't so great. And we're certainly seeing that in other parts of the world right now, that there is still very much that leadership, which, is not about feeling the love at all. And what I'm finding interesting as well is that despite what we've been through, despite what people have been through, despite this high caseload of burnout, rising cases of suicide, that actually organizations, you would think, probably to me and you, that it would be really common sense that you need a comprehensive well-being strategy. And that well-being strategy doesn't have to be the Rolls Royce. It can be start small, but there's still a lot of organizations that I'm seeing that don't have anything in place. And I just find that really curious. What about you?
Wow. No, I would not say that's the case. I at least they're not on my purview. Quite frankly, we're in a very competitive market. The Washington D.C. market, is one of the top markets of the world. And most of the clients that are here, or most of the organizations, I would say, that are here, have a footprint in other parts of the world if they're not a U.S. based organization. And so, by and large, no, that's not what I see. What I see is actually on the flip side. So I did a talk for the event industry in Las Vegas earlier this year in January to kick off the year, and it was around well-being and performance and productivity. And it was very interesting. There were a lot of really, really large brands that were in the house. Obviously, Las Vegas. So think about Harrah's and the Marriotts of the world, and the big hotel chains and things like that. And what I kept hearing in terms of questions is, we're doing basically soup to nuts, A to Z, and it's still not helping our people. And so the flip side of that is, sometimes, again, you haven't really had a really well-crafted strategy around how to approach well-being and productivity and performance. You really haven't assessed well. You really haven't co-created with your team. You really haven't thought through what's the end game. With every client, we always start out, what's the end game? What's it look like when we're done? And we're never done. But what's it look like when we think we're almost done? And let's work backwards from there. And there's not a whole lot around that. It's, I've gone to a conference, they're doing this, let's start doing it. Oh, our competitor has this app, let's grab that app. Oh, I saw this on the weekend, I was out for brunch with a girlfriend and she brought this up and I was thinking we should do that. And so they've added to it. So that's, I would say, one of the things I think is a big no-no, and that I see it happen time and time again. And then the second, you didn't ask, but I'll chime in and add that, is that our HR folks, who are already hardworking, diligent, incredible stewards of organizations, are being tasked with health, well-being, and healthcare operatives. And that is not what they have been trained for. Yeah. And that is not what they went to school for. And quite frankly, there are thousands of experts who are willing to support and really give you the qualified experience and strategy that you need. So as opposed to tasking HR leaders or CHOs, all well-being that they are, that is not their framework. And so that's why we still see people stressed out, people burnt out, people underperforming, mass resignation, because the very people that you've tasked to put together programs to really support the well-being and the health of your employees are not the experts to do that.
Absolutely. I actually wrote an article about that today.
Because you're kidding.
No, I'm not. My background is human resources. I worked in HR for 10 years, and well-being in the workplace extended to, at that time, maybe, if you were lucky, a bit of free fruit, travel to work scheme, subsidized gym membership, and that was probably the extent of it. And fast forward to where we are now, and you're absolutely on the money. The conversations that I have on a daily basis with HR people, learning and development people, pay and reward people that have reached out to us for management mental health training or our employee wellbeing portal. And you're right, they haven't taken that step back and said, actually, what is it that we're trying to achieve and why? And absolutely, they've maybe looked at what other organizations are doing that works for them, but what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another. And the advantage of working with somebody like you or I is that we can ask those questions because we see things from that big picture perspective. So yeah, I also think I find that the HR population, you're right, they haven't gone to school for well-being, but the well-being space itself is such a big space that I sometimes think that they can get a bit swamped and a bit overwhelmed because they're not sure what they should do. So they can maybe start doing something. And sometimes that can work, but sometimes it's also a little bit like throwing jelly against the wall and hoping that it sticks. Have you found anything similar?
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you on so many levels. So last year I went through the certification, and I've always worked very closely with construction developers, et cetera, in the facility space, being a facility designer and manager of wellness centers and fitness centers, et cetera. However, last year we took it a step further and became well-being or well AP experts in the footprint space, right? So this is a certification by IWBI, International Wellbeing Institute. And it's an amazing organization, and it's amazing what they're doing. But part of what you have to do in getting the certification is begin to study all the different concepts around the health and wellness of a facility and all the different things. There's 10 different concepts. So they start with air, water, light, sound, smell, all kinds of things. And the thing that I found being in this industry 24 years is that, oh my, like there's so much to know. There's just so much. You will never, it never ends. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry for a reason. So how much more so if you and I work in the industry and see how vast and innumerous it can be when it comes to approaching health and well-being, and what's the best way to do that. How much more so than for someone who really sits outside the industry that's trying to support their people as best as possible to find a strategist that can really help you with it. Like if you're trying to get your heart in shape, you wouldn't go to a CPA. So it's kind of the same thing. It really is like that, because there are just so many different things that affect the health and well-being of this body, which is such an important vessel. Don't take it for chance. Find a great expert or strategist that you can work with. I'm sure Mind Solution can provide that. Aerobodies, we're here in North America if you need us, but please find that, because you need that. And it's your most important commodity, which is your people, your human capital.
Absolutely. And you're so right. It sounds like the Well Building Award. The Well Building Award, which, as you say, it's about light, it's about space, it's about air quality, purification. It's like you almost expect to walk into these well buildings and just be transformed into like a Zen goddess or something. But yeah, I find, even as you say, working in this space myself, that there are so many different spectrums and so many different facets when it comes to well-being. I mean, my personal favorite is the mind, and I absolutely love developing products or training people on the mind, or working one-to-one in executive coaching and really getting into people's minds. But I'm not an expert in men's testicular health. I'm not an expert in the menopause. And yet these are real tangible issues. That's why we work with associates to bring them on board. But it's like you say, it's huge. So
Yeah.
for HR to be in that space and be thinking, well, what do we need to do? And sometimes they just do something and it feels better, because it's like, okay, we've done something. We've run a resilience webinar. It's okay. But absolutely. So what would be your advice for anybody listening in, Fran, wherever they are in the world, that if they're in that space where they know that they need to do something, but they're not quite sure where to start, apart from reaching out to us, like what would be your kind of top tips that you would share for somebody in that space?
I would say first and foremost, just assess. It does start with an assessment, and the assessment can be obviously wide scale. The assessment could be very simple and just in terms of asking people some key questions around well-being and what's important to them and how you're currently measuring that. I think that always starts first with the assessment. And I think, this is one of those areas I could talk about endlessly because it is so important. I think the other piece is that there are so many well-being experts out here that will provide a consultation. I usually like to talk to people several times before any document or agreement is drawn up, just to make sure we're a good fit, because every client is not a perfect fit for you. And maybe there's someone else that I know in our network, and now Mind Solution, obviously, that we could refer you to if that's not something we do. But again, start with your assessment and then talk to a strategist. Just have a free consult around what it is you're trying to achieve. And even for our HR folks, not to leave them in the wind, sometimes an HR person just needs a good consultant or strategist they can talk to themselves about, here's what I'm thinking about rolling out. What do you think of this? How could we measure this? What are we looking at in terms of outcomes? What are the data analytics we should be thinking about? What does this mean in terms of how it's going to affect other organizations or other business units in our organization? So I think starting with that and really, again, having a meaningful conversation with a strategist would be very helpful.
Yeah, and especially what you said about the data analytics, because one of the things that we absolutely encourage organizations to do is whatever you're doing, measure it, measure the return on investment so that you know what an impact it's had on the wider business, not just on the actual kind of traditional HR stats, but how's this improving your relationship with your customers? How's this improving not just productivity, but actually the bottom line performance, sales, marketing, customer services, all of that, it ripples into everything. And actually, with that in mind, for some leaders that might be thinking, yeah, I really want to do this. Like, these ladies have got me really pumped up. I can see I need to do something. And then they kind of go, oh, but we haven't really got the budget, or we haven't got the budget that we need. And I'm like, yeah, but if you put a business case together, we can show that you can actually make money from doing this. But we know that organizations, they do have budgets, don't they, Fran? So what advice would you give around budgets and making things happen?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I would love to talk about this all day. Unfortunately, that's one of those, I think that's a part 2 for us.
We can have it as a part 2 for us.
Yeah, I definitely think so, because I think that the budgeting piece is kind of what comes next. And I think you're absolutely right, Sarah. It's not really about having a huge budget. You don't have to have $1 million to make $1 million impact, but you do need to know where to start. And you do need to know what your people need most. I think that's what I would leave your listeners with most importantly. We have a lot of free information on our website, aerobodies.com. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Fran B at Aerobodies, or just Fran Dean-Bishop. I'm more than happy to answer any questions around that. But I think, again, just think about your end game. What is the end game you want to accomplish? And again, take small steps to work towards that. And I'd love to come back for part B and talk about budgets and how you align that.
We will make that date, Fran. But thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk to somebody in the same space, knowing that we are co-creators trying to have a really positive impact on the world. So if you want to stay on the line, and for anybody listening in, then we'd love to hear your comments. So drop your comments in the comments box. But for now, have a wonderful day.
Keep up the fabulous work. Thank you, Sarah.